Debt. Most people think the goal of money is simple: avoid debt. But modern economies don't actually work that way. In reality, debt sits underneath nearly every major financial system: business expansion, home ownership, government spending, even investing. So the real question is not whether debt exists. The real question is whether you understand how debt works, because debt can quietly build wealth or quietly destroy it. And the difference usually comes down to a single mental model. In this video, we'll examine the myth about debt, the truth behind financial leverage, the rule disciplined investors follow, and the mistake that traps millions of people in permanent debt cycles. The most common advice about debt is simple: debt is bad. Many people grow up hearing this idea repeatedly: avoid credit cards, avoid loans, avoid borrowing. At first glance, this sounds responsible. Debt often causes financial stress, and uncontrolled borrowing can destroy personal finances. But this statement, debt is bad, is an oversimplification. Because in modern financial systems, debt is not just a risk, it is also a tool. Large companies use debt to expand production. Governments use debt to finance infrastructure. Real estate investors use debt to acquire property. Even many of the world's most successful businesses were built using borrowed capital. So the problem is not simply debt itself, the problem is how debt is used. And this leads to the deeper truth about debt. Debt is not inherently good or bad. Debt is leverage. Leverage means using borrowed capital to control a larger financial asset. When used carefully, leverage can accelerate wealth creation. For example, a business may borrow money to expand operations. A homeowner may use a mortgage to purchase property earlier in life. An investor may use financing to acquire an income-producing asset. In each case, the borrowed money is used to acquire something that can potentially generate value over time. But leverage has an important property: it magnifies outcomes. If the underlying investment performs well, debt amplifies the gains. But if the asset fails, the debt still remains. This is why leverage must be approached with discipline, which brings us to the rule. A useful rule in personal finance is simple: debt should only be used to acquire assets that have the potential to produce long-term value. This is sometimes described as the difference between productive debt and consumptive debt. Productive debt may include financing education that increases earning capacity, borrowing to expand a business, purchasing income-producing property. In these cases, debt is connected to a system that may eventually produce cash flow or financial growth. Consumptive debt is different. Consumptive debt typically finances lifestyle consumption: credit card purchases, expensive electronics, short-term spending that creates no lasting financial value. Once the consumption is finished, the debt remains. This distinction is not always perfect. But over long-time horizons, people who consistently align debt with asset creation tend to build stronger financial positions. And people who repeatedly use debt to finance consumption tend to accumulate financial pressure. But even people who understand this rule often fall into a very common mistake. The most common mistake with debt is not mathematical, it is psychological. Debt often feels invisible at the moment it is created. When someone swipes a credit card, there is no immediate loss of cash. The cost appears later. This delay weakens financial awareness. Behavioral economists call this phenomenon temporal discounting. Humans naturally value immediate benefits more than future costs. So the small convenience of borrowing today can feel harmless, even when the long-term cost is significant. Over time, this pattern can quietly create a debt cycle: borrow, spend, repay, borrow again. Each individual decision may seem small, but the cumulative effect can trap people in long periods of financial obligation. This is why understanding debt is not only about interest rates, it is about understanding human behavior. A useful way to think about debt is this: debt is neither a villain nor a shortcut to wealth. Debt is a financial amplifier. When debt is attached to productive assets, it can support long-term financial growth. When debt is attached to consumption, it can quietly drain future income. So the real question is not simply, Do you have debt? The more important question is, what system is that debt connected to? Is the debt helping build assets, or is it financing temporary consumption? Over long periods of time, the direction of that system matters far more than the presence of debt itself. And people who learn to treat debt as a disciplined tool rather than an emotional decision often develop a much more stable relationship with money.